Good evening, everybody in New York City and around the world. My name is Jack Thomas, and I have the good fortune of introducing my business partner and a dear friend, Anshar Seraphim.
Great.
Anshar, good evening.
So good to see you, Jack.
So, what a week it's been, I know, for us personally and professionally. The speed of life comes at all of us today faster than most. You and I have had multiple conversations on the good fortune of manifesting wellness and what that looks like for you and I with your background and your story. And we've talked before, your cognitive learning is far faster and quicker than anybody else. And then you and I had become friends, and you had recognized my somatic learning. And that was like a whole new concept to me of learning within my body. And by learning within my body, um, and you learning within your mind, um, we feel pretty comfortably confident that the world is completely changed, and you and I are here to serve the others.
Yeah, there's an old thing called the anthropic principle, and it talks about this deviation. I think the best way to put it forward is to actually talk about for Professor Xavier of the X-Men and Magneto, right? Both mutants, right? Very different approaches on life. And if you look at the weak and strong anthropic principle, the idea is if you're coming into a new age with a new set of skills, or you're a mutant, or you have heightened interoception, or you've learned to leverage being on the spectrum, or being neurodivergent, or how your specific neurotype to your advantage. Either you can look at that as a competitive advantage against the world, or like Professor Xavier does, you can think about yourself as an antecedent, an ancestor to the people who are going to come after you. What kinds of cultural changes, systems, how can you change mental health and wellness? And you kind of mentioned somatic and passing. It's kind of a big deal. Everyone has interoceptive feelings, like you get that gut feeling that something's not okay.
So I'm going to put my hand up, and so we set up this evening as a riff because you and I do this all day. Just so everybody knows, in the corporate environment, you and I as partners are set up as a C corporation. We've made it a safe space, right? We formed it in New Jersey. We're operating in New York City. You're in Virginia. And we're speaking with our business relationships in South Africa and around the world. But it's really about just being yourself. And so at the happy spot, my attorneys and my business partners say, don't say it. I'm going to say it. We recommend for all our employees to be high. Please get high. Please get happy. And the reason being is, we both giggle at this, but on a serious note, you and I are neurodivergent on two opposite ends of the spectrum. But when we sit in the room with our other relationships around the world, we all recognize that we're different, and we call it nonlinear thinking. It could be called a polymath. It could be called autism. It could be called neurodivergent. But whatever it may be called, when we all come in the room together, we know that we're different, but we respect each other. And there's a moral and ethics code. And that's really what I wanted to kind of high level touch upon from my background and your background. And so nothing is laid out here. I'm just kind of riffing with you. So my background being in New York City, where I'm going to touch upon that in a minute, and your background growing up with your heritage of the Indian background and the tribal wisdom that you bring to the table that others couldn't understand, but how we marry that together and how we moonshot through the world. So what I want to just touch upon is this plaque, right, in New York City that you helped put together. And I'm just going to read it out loud because I know the lights don't show it well. And so this is the beginning. It says, in commemoration of the first gathering honoring the intersection of oral, intergeneration, wisdom, and multicultural collaboration. So that's just the first paragraph. So the oral, it goes back to, and you and I have talked about this, the elder statesmen in my world, right? If I go back 50 years, as a kid, they would tell you, don't talk, just listen. Right. And so you were forced to sit there now versus today, fast forward, everybody has their phone, they're speaking, they want to be heard. I'm not saying either is good or bad. It's our jobs as professionals and as leaders around the world to help coordinate everybody. So we're not going to live in the Tower of Babel and have war. We're going to sit in the Tower of Babel and have communication. And so, thoughts on that? I'm just kind of throwing that out there for you because I
I
see the
can
smiles.
answer as a neurodivergent person, as a native South American. I could answer as a psychologist. I could answer as a cognitive, an expert in applied cognitive neuroscience. There's a lot of different ways I could answer that. But
So give me the top three, right? And so really that's because I that's the flavor of people like us.
sure. Well, I think one thing that people don't think about is the benefit of diversity. There's been a lot of studies about how diverse thinking styles and diverse approaches can change the way that you solve problems. And it's interesting, we're talking about multiculturalism. A lot of people don't know this, that the way that you acquire language changes the way that you think. Your native language changes the way that you think. Your cultural paradigm changes the way that you think. Your necessity for survival changes the way that you think. In fact, it can even hardwire your brain in certain cases, like in PTSD. So there are so many environmental causes to the way that we think. It's silly to think that people from all over the world wouldn't have different ways of approaching the same problem. And you talked about it yourself there with the idea of a polymath. When a person is a multidisciplinarian and you've been exposed as a subject matter expert to a lot of different passions, that's one thing that neurodivergent people who are currently have lower support needs do have that hyper focus on things. They really love to play with systems or special interests. And what sometimes people don't think about is that your respective toolkit that you've picked up over the course of your life gives you a unique approach as a lived perspective too. If you were I don't know, let's say you used to design kilns for pottery and you had to design the ovens to cook them, and then you went into biomedical engineering, and then maybe you went into neuroscience, and then maybe you went into organic chemistry and got into low energy sugar reactions in the lab or something. When you decide to become a chef, you may be able to make a cake that tastes better than anyone's ever tasted before because of the different things that you've been exposed to and the way that those things have made you think. And to think that even if we all came from the same culture, that if we had different journeys, we wouldn't have new insight to share with each other. I think that's short-sighted. And it's I always hear this word in the corporate world, we all want to align. But if we're all aligned, then none of us are trying different methods to see if we can do something better or differently. So it's definitely food for thought.
So that word alignment, right? So you and I are as I will say in business, tested each other, right? Like you do something, I do something, you see how the other one reacts. And you and I have enough patience that in time we really got to know each other. So, right. So
We have patience so we don't become patients. Yeah.
I'm gonna come into you, right, as a New York, right, as a New York guy,
Right.
right, and go alignment, fuck that, right? Like, what the fuck is alignment? Like, right. So the people I work with are everyday people. Now, what's interesting in one of the lines here, everyday people leading extraordinary lives. And that's really important because we're all being bombarded with wellness, mental wellness. We're now entering $1 trillion industry. We know that we're navigating it. We know this is brand new. We don't know what the future is going to hold, but I will share with you that 20 years ago, when I was working in New York City as a distributor and being surrounded by the different cultures, right? I was already introduced to technology, but I didn't understand it. It was really above my mindset. And candidly, I was afraid. I was a paper and pen guy. I was a guy, door to door salesman, knocking on doors, 5 boroughs, right? Building relationships. And this thing called the internet comes out, and it really broke the relationship model that was New York was built on. Now, fast forward 40 years later, people are still striving and craving those relationships. So share with me some of your wisdom, one point of wisdom that your father, your mom gave you from your heritage on that relationship and that ongoing being in contact with somebody. I know that you're in Virginia, I'm in New York. We don't get to contact, but we have to get out in our communities. So what's some wisdom that was handed down from you within your community that you could share with us?
So I grew up in a house with two music teachers. My grandmother, she teaches and plays like 23 instruments, runs a bell choir. She's a composer. She has like three, businesses that she runs in the back, like, linens and all kinds of stuff. And one of the interesting things between her and my mother, because my mother teaches and plays 13 instruments. I'm the dumb one. I play five and not very well. Um, is that I grew up in a house of music, and it was a really strange experience for me because I had 40 families a week come into my mother and my grandmother's home, and they would all be from different walks of life. I remember one flashbulb memory I had was uh was when my mother met some Mennonites, and there was a whole school bus of them, and she called ahead to the house and had us take all the technology and take it out of the living room, and we just had a school bus full of Mennonites all getting down on their fiddles and dancing and doing all that stuff in the house. um, I think that you can create your own culture, and I think one of the things that the internet did do for us is that when you have something like, I don't know, let's say autism, maybe the statistic's out of date, but let's just say 1 out of 44 people is diagnosed with autism. I think that's within like 5 years, last 5 years for a statistic. You don't really get to meet other people like you who have relatable experiences. You don't get to understand that there's a valence of your experience that other people share, that you can commiserate, that you can put your heads together and decide an approach, decide together how to feel about the way that the world thinks of you. When you're alone, that journey is really confusing. And I think especially for you and I, and this is at different stages now, because I mean the average age of diagnosis now for ASD is like 4 years old. I didn't get my diagnosis till I was like 19, and you didn't learn about your neurotype and until decades later. Think of just the
Right,
generational
in my
differences.
50s, you could talk about, right, when I was the old guy, right? I was the old guy in my 50s, but that's revolutionary. And that's really the conversation. It was because of technology, because I was introduced to Dr. Perry Noppert in the Netherlands through Yvonne Dam out of Spain. And they all looked at me like it was just so obvious that I fit into this autistic model, which I defer to as neurodivergent. I grew up in Queens. We were doing therapy before therapy. I'm 59. I had a fighting problem. I had a real behavior issues, real. So by the time I was 10, right, they already had me in therapy. And so how fortunate that over 50 years ago, I was already in therapy, right? But that is now passé in today's world. So the part that really I want to kind of get into in a couple of moments, we're about to go into break, is not what was, but what is. And so what is we now have the technology, we now have the friends, and we now have the tools, one of them being the human score. We need people that are corporate doulas. And so that's what we're going to talk about when we come back. People ask, what's human score? What's corporate doula? This is the business world. This is New York City. We're catering to people like the Dennis Keynes of the world that have led different organizations, the Dan Marzukes that are presidents of insurance companies, the Sarah Crom, right? CPA, brilliant woman leading a group in New Jersey. It's those people that when we bring everybody together with good energy, we stand a chance of having a positive effect on our society. We'll be back in a moment. We're about to move to break. Anshar, such great time always with you. Thank you.
Same, Jack.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's the Conscious Consultant Hour Awakening Humanity, Thursdays, 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Welcome back to the Happy Spot. My name is Jack Thomas. I am neurodivergent. I am authentic New Yorker. What constitutes an authentic New Yorker in my book? Here's how I constitute an authentic New Yorker. I'm sitting on the west side of Manhattan, 44th Street, 59 years old. And when I was 5 years old, I had the good fortune of going to work with my dad, and the greatest thing in the world, and driving in a truck, right? One of those big like Amazon trucks, but back then it was just, right, they called it a Grumman truck. I was seatbelted in. My dad would get me a donut, a cup of coffee, and I thought the world was ours as we drove through Manhattan and screaming and hollering at everybody. And that's how I was raised in my cultural upbringing. Which brings me to this commemoration point. And there's a line in here. It says, in unity, we honored the voices of the past. Now, my dad, we're coming up on 5 years, June 30th since passed. And, you know, the hardest part was he was 77. It was during the pandemic. And I was in business with him, and we went through the fights of father and son, and I had exited the business. And the goal, you know, in life is to help others so they don't have to go through those struggles. So as we come in, I'm going to be remembering my father. The business was sold. I had organized and structured a business to be sold, and I had left. And that was emotionally a whole nother conversation, and walking away from what I was third generation. But why that's important is we move into the business world of mergers and acquisitions today. And mergers and acquisitions, I've done many a deal, from $1 billion deal to $1 million deal. And everyone always says the same thing at the table. You have the attorneys, the accountants, the buy-sell group, and going, what's the value of the employees? What's their value? And everyone says the same thing. They're the most important asset of the group. And everybody's full of fucking shit. Right? Full of fucking shit. And it makes me crazy because they all mean it, but no one knows how to equate it to a number. And in our linear society, if you can't put a number to it, it's very difficult for them to put a value. So I want to talk about a tool, the Human Score. Dr. Cliff is introduced it to us, and we're going to be using it. And it gives a measurement. It's a full picture. I like to call it a menu of your employees, what they're thinking, what they're believing, and giving you a score and answers to your struggle. So please, one little nuance or one little thing that a business owner would want to know about the Human Score when you and I have looked at it together, and why we're excited to be bringing it into the United States.
Well, Dr. Cliff P. Lewis, you know, out of South Africa, you know, he's a legal expert in academia. He's gone through all of the iterations that IO psychologists have done over the last 40 years, trying to keep up with the psychological premises of the group workspace, whether that is us working via long distance over, you know, over video calls, or it's us meeting in person and meeting in boardrooms. And IO psychology is responsible for so many of the different things that we do now compared to what we used to do. I mean, all psychology has evolved in that way. Soon as like 150 years ago, we were throwing people into sanitariums and just calling them crazy when they just had normal stuff happening to them, and we would even use them as a place to lock them up. Foucault has a whole narrative on that. I think that the benefit of psychometrics is that IO psychologists spend their entire academic discipline trying to understand what things need to be measured in an organization to tell you more about the behavior, about the outcome. And what the human score really accomplishes is it really gets down into the dimensions of what human centricity looks like. What does a people first company actually look like? And does that affect the bottom line, the happiness of the employees? Does it affect the $47.6 billion annually that we lose to absenteeism? Um, Hell, if you're a high performer and you get burned out, that's 43% of your high performers are no longer working for the company because you squeeze the juice out of them.
So I love the numbers. It's staggering in how you do it. And so the pivot point where we are in our conversation with our clients is the human score is an entry point. It's not the solution, it's the door opener. And so what I enjoy about the tool itself is it touches upon what I'm going to call fairness. So using as an example, there's an economist, Richard Thaler, wrote a book, Misbehaving. And you and I could go for hours on that concept. But the main thing about misbehaving in the economics and human behavior, one thing, the human being. We all bring something a little different to the table, but what is fair to me coming out of New York and what is fair to you coming out, growing up out west, right? And now living on the East Coast in Virginia, our fairness model is different. But what's been amazing has been our conversations when we speak to our friends in Spain, the Netherlands, in South Africa, New York, New Jersey, Virginia. We all see a fairness model. Now, why that's critical here is I'm going to use a word inclusive. So when we use the word inclusive, people on the other side of the aisle say, oh, that's a woke term. And the people that are looking at the ultra right-wing conservatives going, no, we want to include everybody. So the beauty of what we're doing in our business dynamic is we're navigating a very fine line. We're not looking at the political aspect. We look at the human being. We're targeting brokers. We're targeting merger and acquisition companies. We're targeting employment attorneys. We're looking at these three different spectrums because they really can have an effect in society. They've just never had the right tool before. So that's really what I'm hoping that we can get accomplished as we navigate in how we're helping these different types of businesses. For instance.
Well, I think that, that's a great point. And it's not a new idea for very different people to contribute. Alan Turing, he's the reason that we were able to seal up World War II. He literally decoded German communications in Enigma, despite being very different. Nikola Tesla, definitely had a neurotype.
When's his birthday?
He shares a birthday with me, July 10th, and he died in obscurity. And his only friends were birds. So when we treat people who are exceptional but different poorly, we burn them out. And you can see that social cultural burnout, that mistreatment manifest in a lot of different ways, depending on how systemic that mistreatment can be. And the first rule of communication is it's about the person that you're talking to. And the assumption that that person is doing the same, the things that you're doing for the same reasons as you, that they feel the same way as you, is one of the very, very first things that you have to unlearn in communication. It's that golden rule that we're all taught. Treat other people the way that you want to be treated. But that only works with a complete stranger. After that, you have to move upward to the platinum rule. Learn how to treat that person the way they need to be treated.
So well positioned. Treat the person how they need to be treated.
As long as they reciprocate.
That's been a personal struggle for me. The world I grew up in, growing up in New York, we were in business to satisfy people and always looking to make people happy. What wound up happening were really two things, technology and 9/11. Let me just call it as it is. Technology in the early 90s, as we all in business in New York, it changed our lives. And then 9/11, right? Trauma happened, terrorism. And how to handle trauma and terrorism, most people weren't trained for it. Now we have the speed of computers. So at the Happy Spot, I feel very fortunate that we have put together the wellness journey and we give it away to all employees. We're looking to get 1,000 people enlisted and give it to them away for free. If they need and want more personal coaching, that we can get into, and we'll talk in the next segment about dollar amounts and how to financially kind of chime in. But we're going to give it away. So the CEOs, right? If the CEOs aren't going to do it and they're not sure what to do, it then takes people in New York, right? Because this is what we've always done. We get sick and tired. Look at this guy coming from Maryland, shooting up somebody in CEO. Listen, hey, Free Luigi, oh, you come in with a gun and shoot a guy up like you're a gangster? Listen, that's when we have crossed our line in society. And the shame is he came from a good family, highly educated, 10 blocks from here, you gun down an executive, whether you agree with him or not. That's the moral code of we all agree that not all of us really agree because people are now busy supporting Free Luigi. So I don't want to beat up those people. I want to extend the conversation going in corporate America. Here are tools that we can help that we're bringing over from Europe, and we can help CEOs to navigate some of these changes going on in our world. Because we have to remember this line in our plaque, everyday people leading extraordinary lives. And what happens is when that speed, the breakdown, we'll get into how corporations can go about avoiding burnout, absenteeism, and the turnover rate, because we're going to benchmark it with the human score. So we're going to move off to break. We'll be back in a moment, coming back on benchmarking, human score, and talking about how corporate dualists can use the tools. Anshar, you're awesome. So great having you in the room.
You too, Jack.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Hi, I'm Linda Marsanico. The A Train to Sedona is a memoir about my journey to love and compassion. It's also the name of my new broadcast on Wednesdays at 12 noon. When we are spiritual, we embrace possibilities and ideas, which strengthen our mind, body, spirit, health, and wisdom. On the A Train to Sedona broadcast, I plan to interview guests who embrace these expansive practices. Join us on Wednesdays at 12 noon on Talk Radio New York City.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to the Happy Spot. I have Anshar Seraphim here with me as we're talking about the world as it's shifting today.
Thank you so much, Jack. Good to be here.
So where we left off was corporate doula, and I will share with you, I was a tax lobbyist against the insurance industry, representing the auto industry in New York City for my entire life. And 20 years ago, and we're not going to show the video clip, but 20 years ago, I was interviewed on a cable station representing the industry. And what's so interesting is when we watch the video, we talk about the future. Well, the future is now. And so many people that are a little younger than us are talking about the future, but due to the speed of time, it's now. And so there are so many new tools, new positions, new jobs. And so when you and I were talking about this word or concept of these coaches, right? Because we target coaches because they're looking for that help. And so we've now created a role for corporate doulas. And so if you could just share the concept of what that corporate doula looks like in the birthright of a corporate organization.
Well, yeah, they oversee the birth and death of systems. I mean, since what, 2000, half of Fortune 500 companies no longer exist. You know, if you can't change, if you can't give birth to new ideas and kill old ones, then you're going to be in that half that doesn't make it. You know, I think one of the most important things that you can learn about a person on a job interview is that they've overcome challenge in their life. How do they respond to challenge? And there's neuroscience behind it too. You have the anterior cingulate cortex. How well do you resist impulses? How easy is it for you to do things that you don't want to do? It's like a muscle. You have to work it. You have to work that neuroplastic connection so that your brain can develop the pathways to overcome your desire to not do things. And some people are sabotaged in it too. And organizations can be the same, whether it's a generational culture from a specific family and they don't want to change because there's that resistance to change. You have that diffusion of innovation curve that really is that same curve, not just for technology, but for accepting new ideas in general. You know, there's a resistance curve to change. And one thing that we've learned in this last 25 years is that change can happen almost overnight for the right reasons. And when it does, when something changes in the market, when something changes in the population, when something changes in the culture, the world has to react. And learning how to react to those kinds of changes is about existential authenticity as an organization. And if you say that your focus is your people, but you aren't changing your policies to take care of your people, then, and you're saying that they're your most important resource, I think that's cognitive dissonance in action.
So I think so much I want to just respond to, but for myself, I'm just going to respond to the one thing. Is from my experience was a dozen years ago, there was a large automotive business that was my background, $1 billion corporation, and between New York and New Jersey, and they did some things that technically were considered a violation, and the Attorney General served them a major fine. We're talking 7 figures.
Mm-hmm.
And I got brought in as the expert at the time because we had a risk management suite of services. But when I looked at the owners, I said, I could provide the service as an outside third party for our risk services. But if you're not willing to change the behavior of your 128 managers, the tools aren't going to work. There was silence in the room. What are you talking about? I said, the behavior and the tools. So for instance, you use the term neuroplasticity, and that really is what kind of triggered my thought here, is when I was 5 years old, we'd come into New York City as a family, we would pick up at warehouses all the tools on the west side of Manhattan. And oh, by the way, that's where all the car dealers started over 100 years ago. So there's a culture and a rhythm built in. And as I grew older and I saw the changes of cars, people, and technology, I was afraid my position in life would be wiped away. There would be no more tools, or the larger corporations would control the tools. Well, I have good news to say. The one tool that's been consistent is the brain. And so that's the one thing, whether you're an illegal immigrant from another country or you're an American citizen, your brain is your brain. We're very consistent as human beings. And so if we're in our relationship able to serve professionals that are in the marketplace, we created the role of a corporate doula. And so the corporate doula, we've given them some tools so they could walk into. You want to touch upon maybe an example of one or two of the tools that we've talked about with the corporate doula?
Sure. Every one of our experts is an expert on that particular subject matter for a reason. And they've seen the kinds of behavior that cannot cause change when people try to change those systems. And they've seen the process of trial and error when people have successfully implemented it. It's difficult sometimes to envision what a system will look like after it goes through behavioral change. You can recognize that something's important, but the growing pains of that are going to be decided by your approach. And do you have to iteratively fail with approaches that you should have known wouldn't succeed because you didn't get the right expert to weigh in on what the right behaviors are? And corporations have known this idea for a long time. They bring in marketing experts. They'll bring in, psychologists to change their sales systems, but they don't point those systems inward. Instead, IO psychology has to struggle to keep up as a discipline to try and take care of all of the humanitarian, communicative, behavioral and other concerns in an organization, and to try to create a unity of purpose and still have diversity of thought. And it's something that's very easy to do the wrong way. And that's why I know that Dr. Cliff is the right person, because he's been talking on these topics on LinkedIn, on every platform that will listen, for as long as I've known him. And every single time he reads a new piece of research, a new piece of data, he tries to juxtapose that and translate it to the people that make the decisions so that they can understand real importance. And for a long time, IO psychologists have had that experience of trying to tell people the right things to do and watching them do exactly the opposite. And the human score is an opportunity to fix that problem, not because we're offering some free metric as a bonus thing, but because it affects the way that your employees feel. And the happier they are, the more energy they bring to what they do, the more productivity they can give you toward your goals without experiencing burnout. And this is just a truth. It's a truth in the market. It's a truth with your customers. And when we fail to learn from these lessons, when we fail to recognize cultural and social differences, it can hurt companies and organizations, whether it's Coke trying to invent new Coke and losing that touch with their core demographic over the cultural importance of their product, or Colgate Palmolive. I mean, yeah, Colgate, did you know they made a line of TV dinners and they forgot to sub-brand it underneath of Colgate with a different name, so everyone just looked at their brand and thought of toothpaste? Understanding how the brain works, how behavior works, how decision-making works matters. And not being informed on those decisions will cost you valuable resources, time, but also momentum in a market that can completely change to the point that where you're winked out of existence in just a couple of decades, even if you are sitting at the top.
So thank you. So the one area I wanted to touch upon here was cost of services. Putting a dollar amount out on a video, it's in the internet, people are like, well, how much is that? And so it looks like this. We have 4 different entry points. We have one point, we believe in our community that we're going to give this away for free. Here is a strategy on helping your behavior. We put it out on LinkedIn, and we could send people to the happy spot. And that if they apply, we'll also then give them the whole, it's a 1-pager on what to read, how to listen to the internet, how to contain your energy. Now, if people really want to learn the nuances, then join the community and you join in a monthly membership. It's $198. And what I tell most people when they join and they start doing the work with us, we're not here to overtake your world within 30 days. You got to dedicate a couple of months to it. So if you're looking to know how to feel better, think better, and be productive, we're going to give it away for free. Now, large corporations What's in this for you, and what we call large, are corporations generating sales $100 to $300 million. Now, corporations that are larger than that already have some type of a in-house service. Whether they're succeeding or not, we can work with them, but we know the sweet spot of corporations, sizable numbers. And for $360,000, they could have their own wellness center, their own insurance company, their own risk management, and that's over 3 years. So total all in for $360,000. We're also targeting happy ambassadors. And so happy ambassadors are people that don't run or own large corporations, but want to be part of it. And so for a $360 hour consultation, they could be part of the community. And the last one are going to be your family offices. So mimicking Stevie Cohn, who, for those people who don't know who he is, he's a financier out of Brooklyn, New York, exceeded everyone's expectation in life, and then bought his dream team, the Mets. So I'm a kid from Queens, and you watch someone buying the Mets, and we had the good fortune, we had taken a look at some of his business antidotes he has done, and we've created an outline of what it looks like, but it's in alignment with the family office and the work that we're doing. So we come into privately held families, right? They have to have a threshold of assets, but we're not talking a Stevie Cohn of a multi-billionaire. We're talking about someone who has a couple of $1 million, but they want to live an extraordinary life. Those are the families that we can patiently, over a period of time, work with them. So everything has a dollar point, time and money, and we have the systems. So strategically, what we try to do is say to people, we want to give this to you. Here's the strategy. 9 out of 10 times, people blow it up. 9 out of 10 times, but at least they had a chance to go and try it on their own. And so, Ansha, what do you think? I haven't figured it out yet. How to help people before they hurt themselves or blow something up, and then saying, okay, that didn't work so well. Now come and hire professionals to guide you. Most people want to blow it up first. Any input on how we can help people not shoot themselves in the foot?
Well, there is a cultural change in the way that we look at failure. And any cultural anthropologist will tell you that social systems matter. You know, like when you go out into the woods and come back as an adult into a tribe, there is a period of time, they call it the liminal phase, where you exist outside of that culture and then have to re-enter it with a new authority. And that experience that happens when you go out into the woods is what defines you. Can you survive? And the ability to survive, to overcome failure, to use failure iteratively as a positive process, despite the biological programming that you have to remember failure negatively. Because when we watch a child stumbling around trying to learn how to walk, we smile because we know it's at the end of that journey. But when an adult fails, suddenly we flip the script. It's not what we learned from what we did wrong. It's the fact that we did wrong. And no one can have a transformative experience without needing to transform. So if these problems exist in an organization and they've tried an approach to fix it and it hasn't worked, or it's been only marginally successful, the real question about what happens when failure occurs is, do you change your approach? Do you grow from your failure? And that is a question organizations have the ability to answer.
It's such a great question. And we're going to pivot right there. We're going to move to break, and we're going to come back and talk about approach and the worldwide global class effect. Anshar, thank you so much. We'll be right back at the happy spot.
Were you an essential worker during the pandemic? If you needed to learn stages of epilepsy, did you depend on advocates? Did you use new innovations to cope with mental and neurological issues? Maintaining high quality of life and keeping good mental health are what we all strive for. I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each week top healthcare influencers, professionals, and innovators answer these questions and more. Stay tuned on Thursdays at 5 p.m. on talkradio.nyc, and I will continue to be frank about health with all of you.
Ready to serve up success with a splash? Hi, I'm Bruce Kramer, a.k.a. the Corporate Cockroach.
I'm the Renaissance woman, Angie Snowball.
And I'm your strategy doctor, Dr. Navtej Desange, inviting you to Serving Up Success with a Splash.
Join us as we shake things up with real talk and real strategies centered around awareness, action, and accountability.
And yes, there really is a cocktail involved. Please join us and sip your way to success.
Serving up success with a splash, where wisdom meets happy hours. Cheers!
Cheers!
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to the Happy Spot. This is talkradio.nyc, and we have Anshar Seraphim. My name is Jack Thomas. What we've been talking about is the culture change within the corporate environment worldwide. New York City has made the changes over the years. I've looked at the history. I've been brought in on situations where business owners were fined by OSHA of $125,000, and that was 20 years ago, which would be, the equivalent of 1.2 million, give or take. And what do you do when a federal government comes in and they fine you for something? Most people run to the attorney, and all they know is they have another $10,000 bill. So over my lifetime in growing up in New York, there are a couple of organizations. One's called the Alley Pond Sanctuary. It's right near Creedmoor, the largest insane asylum in New York. I had the good fortune as a kid growing up playing Little League. And so in 1975 as a kid, Creedmoor is probably a 30-story building in the middle of Queens. And it was intimidating. It was scary. And as we would go play baseball as little kids, our fathers would tell us if we didn't run faster, they were going to let the crazy people out of the insane asylum. Now, today we can kind of smirk. Back then, that was humor for fathers. And it didn't matter what your nationality was. They all had a chuckle. It's 50 years today, and we know that type of humor doesn't work. So what does work? Moral ethics. But if we're all coming from a different sounding point, how do we figure that out? New York City has been well known worldwide for not generations, but for multi-generations in doing that. And that's what I take great pride in New York City, and why we have chosen this place, the Producers Club, where we're meeting up. And I want to touch upon a couple of books and scenarios we're utilizing. So when I traveled last year, Worldwide Happiness, I read The Global Class. It makes it so simple. Scale global, focus local. So by focusing local, we're here in New York and New Jersey. We serve people around the world, but at least we have a starting point. And the other book magazines we're following, Crain's Currency. They speak to family offices, and they talk about the hardest part for family offices are finding professionals to help coach families. Hence why we've created the strategy. We already knew the problem of people, but there's no problem with the process. So if we could give this information away to other family offices that have wealth, that have ilk, then that can also then flow through into their corporations. So it's a subtle approach in what we're doing and working on. It's a long-term play. I feel fairly confident that we should have our success over the next couple of weeks, because we've all invested so much energy and time, and it's just coming in at the right moment.
Well, the commonality of language is so important, and one of the things that, sales performance industries have known for a long time is that when you name metrics of performance and start measuring them, your approach changes. And even if you have a successful approach, that approach is evolving because you're keeping your finger on the metrics. A lot of the words that we use about the emotional experience of being in organizations are very subjective. They're very personal. When we all go to work, all participating in our own little Tower of Babel, where there is a lack of communication, where we're using the same word over and over again, and it means something different to someone else. And I think one of the cool benefits of the human score is that it takes those quantifiable metrics, those things that companies are used to tracking, and creates real understanding of the cultural divide, the interpersonal divide, the psychosocial divide that happens in organizations. And it lets you do something when you start to see that fire burning. Instead of seeing all of your assets go up in smoke, you have a chance to grab that fire extinguisher and learn from the failure.
I love your analogies and how you put it in. So learning from failures, just to bring history and heritage and energy, the building, the production studios where we're sitting, this is where Jerry Seinfeld and Larry David started. And so there's pictures here that are showing a history of a speakeasy cultural comedy club. And so if we look at President Zelensky in Russia, he started off as a comedian. He's now the president of a international country. And so sometimes just everyday people, right, using just a little bit of humor. So we're also trying to focus on bringing some lighthearted humor. We're extending our services out to other professionals that are in the neurodivergent community, that they could step in and meet up with us on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, and utilizing already existing tools. And I think that's been some of the brilliance that we've had together, is within conversation, organizations, specifically HR. I was talking with Matt Dwyer the other day. He's one of my yogi friends. He works in the HR world. And I started talking to him. He goes, "How'd you do that?" I go, "Do what?" He goes, "You understand our pain." And I'm like, "I've been around the HR world for 20 years. You've been fortunate. You have a SHRM metric to work off of. However, everybody is an overload. So when you bring in an outside third-party company like us, we just look at one thing, the approach. We bring one tool to the table. We don't need to bring our corporate doulas because we have the strategy and the tools. They're just more efficient if you want to use them, but we can happily work with anybody based on the strategy. And that's the part where people get lost. They're like, how do you do it? And I'd say that, you share with me your thoughts on some of our successes that we've seen together, please.
Oh, man. Well, for me, as a behaviorist, it's about behavioral success. How can we take people that have completely different behaviors in communication and learn how to work with one another? And one of the things that I've learned in my experience at the Happy Spot is that there is a consideration for the unique culture of each person, the space for them to be themselves, but to approach their role as themselves. And for us all to learn from what we do well and what we don't. And as you mentioned earlier on, you and I have a very different approach to things. We approach things from two different angles. And that means that we see more. We're ants on different parts of the elephant. We see different parts of the problem. And I think that's an insight that every organization should take advantage of when presented the opportunity to meet with a corporate doula and to learn about how whatever their unique perspective has to offer on those incredibly important metrics that they learn about with the human score. It's an opportunity to learn about the performance indicators that you didn't know that you had and that are already giving you the results that you're already invested in.
So thank you for that. So what I want to do is we have probably about 5 minutes left, but I really want to round it out and make this now about you. So people don't know, right? You're such an unassuming looking human being, but you have been on 60 different podcasts. You have spoken at the United Nations on neurodivergency. I could name all the different people, but what I really want you to talk about and kind of delve into is your new tool called Ask Anshar and ChatGPT. So in the open market, I say to people, I go, my business partner is brilliant. He has a tool, Ask Anshar. Please bring any question you want. And they're like, well, I could do my own ChatGPT. And so I want to just kind of give the rest of the time here, if you want to just speak about Ask Anshar and how you differentiate your Ask Anshar versus if we all just went out to ChatGPT, and just kind of give a little riff in that area.
So one of the interesting things about stochastic LLMs, like GPT or Gemini or any of these, in the way that they handle language, is that it's very easy for things to become an echo chamber. Because there is a stylistic interpretation of language and it tries to match your tone, it tries to match your narrative style. It's kind of like that person who believes in a conspiracy theory, Googling it on Google and seeing 9,000 results for it, and then immediately thinking that it's true. It gives you a kind of confirmation bias. And you can get lost inside of an LLM because in the process of reflecting your ideas, it can give you the idea of confirmation of your ideas. It can give you a God complex. But believe it or not, the process can actually work in reverse. You can use neurolinguistic ideas to change the way that an LLM responds to all kinds of things. So, and we've long known that how to influence copy and style, but changing the way that LLM associates language can also change the way that it thinks, and it can create a model for how you need to be thinking about behavior. And behavior has all kinds of different things that go into it. You have neuroaffective primacy, you have exposure, you have negative memory bias, you have hardwired systems of trauma. When you experience something negative, your brain hardwires you for that experience. So I think that there's insight that we can get from systems like AI, but we have to change our approach. And that's what that kind of a whole project represented for me, was a change in approach.
Well, we're coming to our final moments, and what I wanted to do is, for our everyday people living extraordinary lives, ask what is the acronym for LLM? Because when I learned it, it's so simple, but it sounds so important. So what is
It's a
LLM?
learning language model.
Right? So it's that simple. It's a learning language model. And so when we can have people in the room that are uber intelligent, but also give you just the foundational conversation, that's what we do with the Happy Spot. We coordinate people like corporate doulas, business coaches, attorneys, the human score. You bring us on board together. We have somatic and cognitive learning. And if you're a business owner, you're not sure what to do, give us a call. We're happy to help. Thank you, everybody that's out in the audience today. Anshar Seraphim, Jack Thomas, The Happy Spot. Don't forget, if you want to join our company, make sure you can roll a joint.
Thanks a lot, Jack. Have a good one, all.
Thank you, everybody.
You're listening